Hello YouTube, Tony here. This video we're gonna recap the 2013 GDC talk on 10 Principles for Good Level Design by Dan Taylor. Dan is an amazing designer who worked with several studios like Electronic Arts, Rockstar, Ubisoft, and was working as a senior level designer for Square Enix at the time. And I'm not sure what he's up to now. On the last recap I made from Miriam Ballard's GDC presentation, we talked about environment design as spatial cinematography, which focuses more on the visual aspects of level design. But here on Dan's talk, we're gonna focus on the more practical principles of level design. Again, I made this PowerPoint with the slides from his talk, but I added annotations, which I'll provide the link on the video's description, and also the link for Dan's presentation. I try to write only the essential on the slides, but almost everything he says is important. So there's a lot to unpack here. Alright, let's get to it. "10 Principles for Good Level Design" by Dan Taylor. Dan was tasked to running the level design on Hitman. He talks about Dieter Rams, who is a German industrial designer who is mostly closely associated with the consumer products company Braun, the furniture company Witzel, and the Functionalist School of Industrial Design. And I think he based the 10 principles of good level design on the 10 principles for good design by Dieter Rams. And here I post the 10 principles for good design. You can pause and see for yourself. Some of those are related to level design as well, but others are not. And he apologized, saying that there's gonna be interdisciplinary crossover in these principles. So it's more than just level design, it's mission design, narrative design, mechanic design, etc. A good level designer should be well versed in all of these fields. And like Miriam said, these rules are just guiding principles. So in Miriam's talk, she says how those rules are rule of thumbs, so they are not written in stone. Number 1, good level design is fun to navigate. Just traversing a level presents the player with many different gameplay vectors. Observational, the action of surveying one's surroundings. Strategic, process the observation to plan out your actions. And navigational, the action of actually traversing the level itself. Players should always know exactly where to go. Maybe not immediately, but if a player takes too long to figure it out, there's probably something wrong with the level. That's why it's important to test, and if you can test with different people, you never know what struggles someone's gonna find. And here he gives us a good example of clarity and flow from Mirror's Edge. So just by looking at this image, we can see the path the player is gonna take, because there's the red elements positioned, and that's how Mirror's Edge approach the clarity and flow of the game. In contrast, the level doesn't need to be easy to navigate all the time, but it needs to be fun. Good example is the Brazilian favelas in Modern Warfare 2. So he goes on by saying that this level is chaos and you don't really know where to go, but it's still fun to navigate. Number 2, good level design does not rely on words. And now this is an interesting picture to keep in mind when designing. Good level design is like a broken circle. It's down to the player to fill in the gap. The tricky part is that if you make the gap too big, the player won't be able to fill it in. He'll become confused and frustrated. But if you make the gap too small, he'll become bored and won't feel challenged. So here is the key part, the gap. And the gap consists of, we're gonna see here, that there are three narrative types. Explicit narrative, anything that explicitly called out to the player, like cutscenes, text, dialogues, etc. Implicit narrative, anything that the player figures out for themselves. Emergent, the story that the player makes up in his or her own head. And this part right here, the gap, consists of implicit plus emergent. Create that crucial gap. So we gotta have to aim for that sweet spot where the gap is not too big and not too small. Now he's giving us Bioshock example. The best way of creating implicit narrative is a technique called mise-en-scène, which is the art of telling the story through the environmental narrative. Mise-en-scène is translated from French, which means the setting up the stage, and I believe it's a term that comes from theater. So if you look at Bioshock's environment art and design, usually you can tell what was going on without any explanation, any text. Just by looking, we can see that there was a party going on. It was New Year's, and it's probably for some type of high society. So it's very important to tell a story within our environments. Creating emergent narrative, however, is not such an obvious task because the level designer doesn't actually create it. Now, so here he's talking about implicit narrative because the player is gonna look at this and the player is gonna figure out what's going on. Now, when he talks about emergent narrative, it's not such an obvious task because a level designer doesn't actually create it. He merely enables it by providing the player with a choice. Hitman is a great example. The player can use many different gameplay mechanics to kill his mark. So the player is actually creating his own unique story. Too much choice can leave the player confused also. We have to strive for that sweet spot. So he's talking about how player choice can enable emergent narrative. And I think about, I think I said here in Breath of the Wild, yes. So let's just continue and then I'll come back. Number 3, good level design tells what, but not how. So the player needs to know what needs to be done, but most of the part of how to do it comes from the player. He gives Skyrim as example, but Breath of the Wild immediately comes to mind. The shrines are super fun because that is exactly what they do. Now here we can also say that Breath of the Wild has a really emergent narrative type because you can write your own story in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, you know. It's also, I think, orthogonal design. I recommend you look up Steve Lee, orthogonal design. He's gonna talk more about this, how different mechanics can enable many paths. So with these variations and varieties, you can tell different stories. So the player is gonna write his own story, and that is very emergent narrative type. So only give as much information to the player as is absolutely necessary. We don't want to think of our players as dumb. So there's a lot of games nowadays, and from, I don't know, 5 to 10 years ago, that do too much of hand holding, sorry. So we wanna empower the player and believe that they can achieve their goals and they can understand what needs to be done. So if you think about Elden Ring and the Dark Souls series in general, they are really popular, especially because of this, because the player has to figure out everything for themselves. So this might be an extreme example, but I think we gotta be careful with this and not give too much information. Mark Cerny tells us that the player should be presented with concurrent objectives that can be completed in any order he or she wishes. Furthermore, on completion of those objectives, the player should receive a reward which either makes the other objectives easier or modifies them in some way. Ratchet and Clank is a good example. However, this doesn't apply to every type of game. Just to keep in mind, I don't know, like Last of Us. Last of Us is a much more linear experience. So you can't choose different maps that will modify the gameplay from other concurrent parallel maps. But still, this is a very good level design practice for many types of games. Number 4, good level design constantly teaches. Now this is very important because we as humans love to learn new stuff, new things. If you just teach the player on the first few levels the mechanics and then let them then don't teach anything for the rest of the game, you're gonna have to change the levels in some way to keep things fresh. But it's best if you can teach the player, pace out this teaching, so he's always learning new things, even if it's just learning a new way to use a mechanic you implement. Here he's talking about, yeah, I just said this, the human mind enjoys processing patterns for storage and retrieval later. A lot of the fun in playing video games is derived from this pattern analysis. If this pattern analysis ends too soon, the fun ends. So how do we prolong the enjoyment? Through good level design. Each level in your game should introduce, showcase, or subvert a key mechanic. However, you have to pace out it throughout the entire game. Now here's an amazing example. Best example of this concept teaching is any game in the Zelda series. Every dungeon has a new piece of equipment, and each room in the dungeon teaches you a new way to use that equipment. Then the final boss of the dungeon tests your mastery with that piece of equipment. Then in the open world, you're constantly tested with new ways to use that equipment in order to access hidden areas, to find hard container pieces, rupees, and so on. So this makes for a very fun and engaging type of game, which is why the Zelda series is so popular. You're always greeted with a new type of mechanic equipment, and you're gonna use them in creative ways to overcome obstacles, enemies, and so on. Quite similar to the loop that Bethesda used to pace their games, which is learn, play, challenge, surprise. They'll teach the mechanic to the player explicitly, then they'll provide a safe area to experiment, then they'll bring in some threat to challenge, and when the player is comfortable, they'll do something crazy to surprise him. And later he's gonna talk how surprise is also an important element for game design, for level design. So okay, learn, play, challenge, surprise. Number 5, yeah, good level design is surprising. Here is the same graph I think I showed in Miriam Ballard's. I believe it's there. Yeah. So the intensity is usually designed around the roller coaster pacing method. And you can design the game, and you should design the game like this and the levels, because as Miriam Ballard also says, if you have high intensity all the time, it's gonna overwhelm the player and they can also become numb to it. However, if you have low intensity all the time, the player is gonna become bored and is not gonna feel challenged. So you're gonna design the game like this, but you can see that this is predictable. So not the entire game is gonna be like this. You have to throw the player off sometimes and surprise him. So we have to break this pattern every now and then. And here is an awesome example of breaking this pattern. Is the return to USG Ishimura in Dead Space 2, if you played it, which is the spaceship from Dead Space 1. So you know it's gonna be filled with those aliens. Player knows that there are a lot of monsters aboard the ship and is expecting them from the start. But it's not until 15 to 20 minutes inside of the ship that the first monster appears. So it creates this atmosphere of unease and unpredictability, which really throws the player off. So you wanna surprise the player with these variations of intensity. Take risks. Taking risks is important if you want to stand out. It's the designer's responsibility to manage these risks sensibly. So design your levels diligently on paper, but don't forget that what looks good on paper doesn't always work once it gets into the game. And the opposite also can be true. Sometimes a ridiculous idea actually works very well once it's tested in the game. So gray box and test it ASAP. Then he goes on by saying that in Medal of Honor, a grenade puzzle mechanic had to be scrapped because it hadn't been tested early enough. So this can be challenging as well, because we as level designers, we're not usually gonna program the whole game and the mechanics. So we might not have access to every mechanic. So how can you test the mechanic if it's still not available? Sometimes we have to imagine how it's gonna play out. And that is a risk, because you don't know if that's gonna work out or not until you test it. But nevertheless, it's important to take risks, because otherwise you're just gonna be making boring games. Number 6, good level design empowers the player. The 18th century poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe said that you should dream no small dream, for they have no power to move the hearts of men. Go big or go home. As a level designer, you should definitely dream big. Never give a player a shopping list in missions, because essentially video games are escapism. And why would people want to escape to somewhere that they could go in real life? I mean, I agree with this, but as we can see, there are some popular sims simulators nowadays. And again, this is a 2013 talk, so I'm not sure those were uh, much popular. But you can see like supermarket simulators or some things, and people sometimes enjoy those. I myself played, I think it was Power Wash Simulator, and sometimes they are just mindless escapisms, and that is also okay if that's what you're aiming for. Here we I myself have a dream of working in games like The Last of Us and Uncharted, Naughty Dog, you know. And I'm sure if you're watching this, you have similar dreams, or you could dream of working as a level designer for different types of games. That's fine as well. But in these videos, I'm focusing more on the storytelling, narrative driven types of games. So in those senses, I think this real life sucks uh, rule thing he's saying here applies. So yeah, Red Faction Guerrilla uses an example of empowering the player by enabling the destruction of the world elements using different types of weapon. I don't know why he's using this this example, simply because I never played Red Faction Guerrilla. So, and I believe it's an old game, but it is a very old talk. It's probably one of his favorite games, but apparently you can destroy elements of the world, so that feels empowering. I can think of, if I think of an old game empowering, I think about Prototype. I don't know if you ever played, but Prototype feels very empowering. And again, this doesn't always mean needs to be the case. It really depends on the game that you're making. However, deliver the fantasy is a good rule of thumb. Also, um, Infamous used as an example of subtle ways to show the consequences of player karmic choices, like the citizens cheering and helping you if you choose to become the hero, or booing and throwing rocks at you if you choose the villain path. So this is more focused on visible influence of your actions. Not every game is gonna have a karmic system, but still we need to um, provide with a clear feedback for the player's actions and choices. Good level design is easy, medium, and hard. Now here he says that he doesn't like the games that you determine if you're gonna play on easy, medium, or not the game, but he doesn't like the system that you have to pick if you're gonna play it on easy, medium, or hard. And it makes sense because you don't know anything about the game, you don't know how it's gonna play out. So how can you choose if you want to play on easy or medium or hard or very hard? And I kind of agree with this. I understand why the they make this type of thing, because it's to cater to a larger audience. And again, Elden Ring, the Soul series, they don't they don't care about this. You just play the game without selecting a difficulty. And here he says that you can determine the difficulty dynamically with the choices you make inside the game. So by designing multiple pathways in the level, you can design the basic slash main path through your level, presenting an easy to medium challenge, and then clearly call out high risk, high reward paths, or conversely, easier paths than the main path. So, what usually happens is the high risk path is gonna have a bigger reward, which is gonna make the the other parts of the game easier. So that is what he calls dynamic difficulty. Good enough is example of this practice is racing games like Burnout or Mario Kart, where the shortcuts are risky for being narrow and harder to traverse, but provide a significant reduction in your lap time. So yeah, racing games are just a more obvious way of seeing this dynamic difficulty. This is just applicable to racing games. You can use a multi-layered approach in almost every other genre as well. This genre is used as an example here, where the levels are filled with multiple paths, layers, and choices. This approach also extend the replayability of the levels, which makes for efficient game design. Keyword here, efficient game design. We wanna we wanna have the most bang for our buck. So with a multi-layered approach is also what Steve Lee's talk about in that video I recommended for orthogonal game design or orthogonal level design, I don't remember. And how the multi-layered approach enables tons of other possibilities for the player. So it really extends the replayability. Good level design is efficient. Now he goes more into the efficiency. Video game always has a very finite amount of resources, whether that's the technical limitations of the hardware that you're developing, such as memory or pixel pushing power, or the real world constraints like production schedule, the number of people on your team, scope of the project, and so on. It is the designer's responsibility to maximize the use of those resources. For level design, this means not only using the whole animal nose to tail, but doing it more than once and doing it quickly. And how we do this? With the modular approach. Good level designer doesn't just create a level, he creates a series of modular mechanic driven encounters that you can string together to make a level, and another level, and another. On top of this technique also creates a series of familiar moments that the player can use to learn and master your mechanics. So this is a callback to the pattern recognition. Back here, where is it? Pattern analysis, yeah. So enjoys processing patterns for storage and retrieval later. Let's get back. On top of this technique also creates a series of familiar moments. Also, by applying simple modifiers to these modules, it's possible to create variations and keep things fresh by providing increased challenge and surprise. Lego is used as an example here, which is also very similar to the process of gray boxing. I think Hideo Kojima designed some Metal Gear levels using Lego. I'm gonna look it up. I think I remember that. Now he talks about bidirectional, and bidirectional means levels that you're gonna have to backtrack, or not have, but maybe you can backtrack. Modifiers are particularly important for creating bidirectional gameplay, which is a level that the player will experience more than once. However, backtracking is usually not as fun, especially if you make the backtracking essentially the same. So on the way forward and on the way back, you never want it to be exactly the same because that is just boring. So it's a good practice to keep changing things when that happens. Halo's 343 Guilty Spark mission is used as an example here, where I think there's a typo here, where it begins as a search mission with exploratory gameplay, and then when you unleash the flood, all hell breaks loose, and it's intense combat on the way back. So you can change things enemy wise. This is used a lot in like Resident Evil. When you go and then you do something, you turn the powers on, the lights on, or you get the item you were supposed to get, and on the way back, it's crawling with enemies. So this is a common practice. But you can also do, maybe not with enemies, but with the environments and levels themselves. They can change back, like he's saying here, the unleash the flood. Now, I don't remember. I played, but I don't remember Guild Spark. Is he talking about the flood like water level? Because if he is, it's also a possibility. Like, imagine water level is rising on the way back, so that's gonna change the environment and the landscape. So, uh, so that's it. Just change. Non-linear. Expanding on this principle further, levels and in fact the entire game can be made totally. Oh, I'm sorry, I actually forgot to talk about this approach. Modular is used not just in level design. Environment artists use a lot of modularity because you don't want to make the entire game just every single unique piece of art. It's just unrealistic to try and finish a game like that. Maybe Hollow Knight's trying to do something like Silk Song. Maybe that's why Silk Song is taking so many years. They definitely use modularity, but a lot of the drawings and the art feels very unique throughout the entire game. So coming back here, expanding on this principle, further levels and in fact the entire game can be made totally non-linear. Examples of collectibles are used here, like the skulls in Halo, cog tags in Gears of War, and feathers in Assassin's Creed. But these, however, are not great examples of non-linear gameplay, simply because they are not relevant. And we know this is a very, again, this is a very old talk, and I think these types of collectibles are becoming less common in bigger games because not only it breaks the fourth wall, which can be bad sometimes, but it's not relevant to the story. It's just a, how should I put this, mindless dopamine. So I don't think that's a good practice. If you think about Last of Us, you have sort of a, you have collectibles as well. Actually, you have the cards, you have the pendants from the fireflies, but even those, they have they are relevant to the story. Maybe not too relevant, but the cards, they are part of Ellie's hobbies. She had a hobby of collecting these types of cards, and the cards themselves contain stories. And in these stories, you can even put Easter eggs. I think there's a card in Last of Us Part 2, which the name of the hero, because every card is a different hero, the name of the hero is something Druckmann. I think it's Doctor, yeah. Dr. Uckman. So it's a reference to the game's creator, Neil Druckmann. So it's an opportunity there. And it's not just, I don't know, let's collect mushrooms. Collect 50 mushrooms from, imagine you put random mushrooms throughout the level. on Last of Us. And then if you get the 50 mushrooms, you get a trophy and a PlayStation trophy. So I think that that's type of thing. They have a space on certain types of games, but not the games that I'm focusing on, my level designs. So they are not level, so we should always try and tie these objectives into the main narrative thread. Astro Boy for Game Boy Advance is used as reference here. Uh, just a second. Closing the window here. Just don't want any mosquitoes. Okay. So where the game cleverly makes you play all of the game levels again in order to get the true ending, but now with all of the power-ups and player power-ups that the player acquired throughout the game, enabling mechanics that weren't possible the first time. I never played this game, but he says that you can defeat enemies you couldn't before, you could access areas that you couldn't before. So that is a good way to extend the replayability as well. Number 9, good level design creates emotion. In my opinion, I think this is the most important part. This is the most important principle because we want to feel emotions playing games, much like we want to feel emotions watching movies or reading books. And I think there's even a, let me just, I don't want to skip. Yeah, here. Then I'll come back. But this is very important. Books let you imagine extraordinary things. Movies let you see extraordinary things. Video games let you actually do extraordinary things. So I think that is so awesome. And uh, above all else, great level design is driven by this interaction. The game's mechanics. Game levels don't just provide the context for the setting, for the mechanics, they provide the very reality in which they exist. Okay, so here's more mechanic focus. But still, emotions. Why do we read books? Why do we watch movies? Emotions comes first. And now we're going to come back here because there's an important part here which he talks about how emotions have to come first when we're thinking about designing a level. But first, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about the art here. In 2012, the US Supreme Court declared that video games were legally art. According to the dictionary, art is the quality, production, expression, or realm according to aesthetic principles of what is beautiful, appealing, or of more than ordinary significance. Then goes on by saying that he likes to think of art as anything that's been specifically created to provoke an emotional reaction. Now, again, I know this is a lot of text, but I think it's every part of this is so important. The most analogous form of art to level design is architecture. Architects have been playing with people's emotions for hundreds of years, and there are loads of great architectural theories that we can borrow from them. Architecture theory is a huge topic that requires a deeper study on its own. Yeah, so as level designers, we're also gonna need to study a lot of architectural theory. We don't need to actually model these architectures, just the general forms, because that is the job for the environment artists. But we need to specify what type of architecture is going to be there. So if you want to invoke the feeling of dread, you might want to look for, I think, brutalist architecture. Hang on, I think yeah, brutalist architecture. But if you want to inspire awe, you have Art Nouveau, So we can always look it up what kind of architecture correlates to the type of feeling we want the player to experience. And then we look for reference and just provide with the overall shapes. But we're gonna think more of the shapes like elements that are gonna, how do I say this? They have to be relevant to the level design, to the mechanics, to the pacing, how the player's gonna traverse those elements, and not much of the details. So yeah, now that here's a lot of tests. Why did I write all of this? Let me see. There are a lot of classic level design tricks that you can use to create spatial empathy, like tight corners to limit the player's field of view, to keep them tense, suspicious, and claustrophobic. You can make your level twisting and labyrinthian to create confusion and panic, or blow that space wide open to create a feeling of isolation and epic scale. Even switching from a narrow space to a large space to force the player to look at a specific vista to create a sense of wonder. You can bring verticality into the mix to create a feeling of persecution by attacking the player from above, a feeling of vertigo by making the player scale a high mountain or building, or a feeling of hope by placing a reward at the top. Tomb Raider 2013 is used as an example here. I played all of the Tomb Raiders, and they really do an amazing job with level design. They understand these types of feelings and how they correlate with the level design. So I definitely recommend you play those if you haven't. I think the second one is actually my favorite. The Tomb Raider 2 from this new Tomb Raider series, of course, not the old ones, which are also great, but we're more focused on the newer ones here. Ah, yeah. So here is what I was talking about, where we have to work backwards. First, we identify what we want the player to feel. Then we provide with the the right level for that feeling. So the starting point should be the desired emotion you want to evoke from the player, then drill down and select the spatial parameters, the narrative elements, and mechanics that you want to use to release that emotion. If you want to make the player feel persecuted, put an anime AI into your level that constantly hunts him. Exhilarated, engage them in a high speed chase or a firefight in a large open space or open road. Urgency, modify your car mechanics with some kind of time limit. Desperation, give them an almost impossible goal and then save them at the last minute. So as we read this, I'm sure you have examples in your mind as well. You should always pick those examples and look for videos, or if you have the game, just play again this part to have the reference for when you're designing your level. So persecuted, I of course remember of Mr. X from Resident Evil and how we feel always persecuted when he's around, and we feel also desperate because we can't kill him. And exhilarated, we I think about Uncharted series where we have those uh, car chase sections. Urgency, I remember of Metroid when you have to escape, you have the time limit and everything is just blinking red lights and the sounds. So look for your own, look in your own memory, what inspires you, what you remember when you see these feelings. And yeah, lies. Company of Heroes Carentan mission is used as reference for this, where you're asked to protect the town of Carentan against their Nazi invasion force until Allied reinforcements arrive. So that makes the player think all he has to do is hold out until the reinforcements arrive. However, the trigger for the reinforcement is not the time related, but how many soldiers you have left alive, two in this case, making the player really desperate by the end. Using mechanics like this to create emotion is possibly the single most important, goal of a level designer. So yeah, this is brilliant because you you invoke this desperation on the player. Makes you think that he's just gonna have to hold. And I believe Company of Heroes is a real time strategy game, so you would play very carefully, not trying to um, to kill your friends, to kill your units too quickly, because you know that the reinforcements are coming. But the trigger for the reinforcement is when you have two soldiers, so they're gonna have to be killed either way. So uh, it's a genius way to use those kind of lies to invoke those feelings. And number 10, good level design is driven by mechanics. Mechanics are a big part of a level designer. When you Sometimes when you think of level design, you just think of gray boxing. I'm just gonna, open Unreal or Blender and just start putting some box and gray box, and the player's gonna navigate. I know it's tempting to start like that, but it's not. The chances of you doing that and actually works are minimal, because there's a lot of theory involved, and this is why I'm also starting this channel with these types of videos. Now, of course, I'm gonna do more practical and show my work, but first I want to be very thorough with these principles and these um, theory, because that's gonna be the foundation. We're gonna build a strong foundation for a level design. So it's not just about the gray boxing and the traverse. It's also about the mechanics and how the mechanics are gonna play, and how do your levels showcase those mechanics, and even how those mechanics tell a story. You know, it's all part of the level design ecosystem. So here I've already read, but it's very important. So a game's level design is a metaphysical medium through which the gameplay is delivered. Thinking of a painting analogy, the subject of your painting are all of the gameplay mechanics. The composition, what gives your subjects its context. It's your narrative and graphics. The medium, or the actual oil and canvas that you paint, is your game's level. This is a very abstract way of thinking, and I'm not sure I follow 100% of this logic, but I can see what he's talking about. Yeah, sorry. I was thinking about the logic of this here. And you also think about, just read and imagine how the gameplay mechanics and graphics and the level itself correlates with the painting. Oh, that's a lot of text. This is probably very important, as I said. I try to keep the text only essential, but if I think a topic is really important, I don't wanna left out. So your level should be a gameplay delivery system whose primary function is to leverage your mechanics to create a great experience. Topology, architecture, objectives, interaction, combat scenarios should be all designed to showcase your game's mechanics. It's important to have a thorough understanding of your mechanics in order to do this, but this isn't always possible as your mechanics and levels are being developed concurrently. This is what I talked about earlier. When you're designing a level, maybe you still don't have uh, a required mechanic that's going to be programmed later, but you have to risk it. But you should always have a rough idea of the sort of the systems that are being built. Conversely, this can work the other way around. If you think a mechanic that could be cool in your level, talk to your lead mechanic engineer or lead gameplay designer to see if you can get a mechanic to support it. So yeah, interdisciplinary communication between engineers, designer, and artists is absolutely crucial if you want to have a strong level design team. And Deus Ex Human Revolution is used as an example here, which I never played, but I always hear a lot of good things about this game. But so yeah, we can imagine the mechanic, and then if you're working on a team, you can talk to your program, your lead engineer, and see if that could be possible. And again, it could work out by the end, it could not. We only know after we test it. Creative reuse. Riddler challenges Batman Arkham City is used as a really good example of creative reuse of the gameplay's mechanics, where the player has to use his equipment in clever new ways to unlock puzzles. This serves two purposes: extends the playtime and keep the player learning, and the resultant cerebral gameplay fuels the fantasy of being the world's greatest detective, rather than just a man in a cape who's great at kicking ass. So yeah, you change the gameplay type. You're not you change the pacing when you're solving a puzzle. And I played Arkham City. It's a great game. You don't feel that high intensity of combat, but it's a clever way to extend the playtime and vary the intensity levels. This can also be a throwback to Zelda, because Zelda also do this of use the equipment in clever new ways, which is also a throwback to keep the player learning. You always want to keep the player learning. Okay, for recap and ending, good level design, and these are the 10 principles. It's fun to navigate, clear visual language, but feel free to throw in some chaos in the mix. Does not rely on words. Number 2, does not rely on words to tell a story. Use implicit and emergent narrative rather than explicit. He says rather, but in reality, we're gonna use the three. But implicit and emergent is what we want to create that crucial gap in the broken circle. Number 3, tells what to do, but not how to do it. Clearly communicated objectives that players can complete in any way or order they want. Number 4, constantly teaches players something new, keeps the player engaged by continuously introducing or subverting new mechanics. Number 5 is surprising. Don't be afraid to take risks with the pacing, aesthetics, or any other elements. I think there's a comma here with the pacing, aesthetics, or any other elements. Number 6 empowers the player. Video games for escapism. Let the player feel the impact and consequence of his actions. Number 7 is easy, medium, and hard. Use risk reward so that the player can set the difficulty dynamically. Number 8 is efficient, designed for modularity, bidirectionality, and non-linearity. Number 9, creates emotion. It begins with the desired emotional response and works backwards to select the appropriate mechanics to elicit that response. So again, number 9, for me personally, is the most important. And number 10 is driven by the game's mechanics. Above all, it showcases the game's mechanics through the medium at the level to reinforce the uniquely interactive nature of video games. All right, that's it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you